Hello, welcome to another Resto Druid Mythic Plus commentary. In this video I'll review how I make decisions, point out my mistakes, and tell you about important dungeon mechanics. Before this first pull, I like to pre-hop the tank and give the whole team Stampeding Roar. I know we're going to be pulling 2 packs, so the extra speed helps the tank get the mobs grouped up quickly so we can start dealing damage. This pull is pretty dangerous for the tank, especially if these animated weapons end up getting summoned. The animated weapons will chunk your tank for a lot of damage, so you'll want to quickly prioritize healing here. I'm running the Convoke Legendary, so I get my damage out as early as I can, and then I switch my attention back to healing the tank. The affixes for this run were Tyrannical, Spiteful, Necrotic, and Tormented, so I end up spending a decent amount of time helping the team manage the various affixes. Using things like Ursels and Entangling Roots is pretty strong, especially for Spiteful, and then Typhoon as Balance Affinity is great for helping the tank kite and also managing the shades. This next pull, the Mistdancer and Huntmasters all deny a fair amount of area. You want to look for melee that are standing in front of the frontal and try to heal them if they get hit. Also, players standing near the traps can be in a lot of danger. On a high enough fortified key, these will one-shot players, so it's not exactly your problem, but you can do as much as you can to help. I see our tank is running out of defensive options, so I give him my Iron Bark. You also want to look for these famished ticks that patrol in partway through the pull. The tank may not notice them and may not be able to get threat on them, so they might start damaging your DPS teammates. So look for teammates that are getting threat and try to keep them healed up. You can actually use Wild Charge to get past the Spiteful Shades. Their melee timer is long enough that the charge animation will get you past them quickly. These Gluttonous Ticks are pretty dangerous. They can deal party-wide damage when they die, and this damage is proportional to how long they're allowed to channel their Engorge cast for. Your team should be kicking these, but you can also use Typhoon to stop the cast. The Brute mostly deals tank damage, but will also do this Umbral Crash that deals party-wide damage. It's generally not that dangerous. It spawns this Swirly, which won't actually deal more damage to you, but will heal the Brute for the AoE damage that it deals if someone is standing in it. So definitely avoid standing in it to save the time. I saw a gap in this patrol and I thought that we could Stampeding Roar through it, but we elect to wait. I also was thinking that we would end up pulling this mini-boss here, but it seems like this team wants to go out and clear more trash before we pull the mini-boss. This next pull is pretty dangerous. There are 3 Gluttonous Ticks, I believe, and you're going to want to use AoE stops to cancel the Engorge cast. Ideally, you let the Engorge cast go off and then you use a stop, because then the spell will be re-queued and the ticks won't cast it for a short period of time. But if you stop it before the cast goes off and they start to channel, then they'll immediately recast it. Ideally, your tank is using stuns and things along those lines. You can also use Typhoon. Dropping Ursul's Vortex before you Typhoon will also suck every mob back in and keep them grouped up for cleave. This mini-boss is one of the trickier mini-bosses. They have a tank bleed that's pretty dangerous. They do this AoE Wave of Terror cast, where if you're not standing next to a teammate, then you get feared. And then they do a targeted bleed, and any players that are nearby that target will also get the bleed. The aura for this mini-boss is 50% reduced healing, so this guy is pretty tough to heal through. This one in particular is challenging because the next pull and the first boss are both pretty big healing checks. Pretty much every boss in this dungeon is a fairly big healing check. so I'm kind of reluctant to use cooldowns here. I see that we're pretty close to wrapping this up, and even though my weak aura is telling me that we're dying, I know that we'll survive. I like to get the mana orbs power. Not needing to worry about healing, or rather, not needing to worry about drinking is pretty strong. This pack is also a dangerous pack. There are 2 Gluttonous Ticks and a Brute. The Brute can't be CC'd, and so on Necrotic week, you can see our tank is already at 26 stacks of Necrotic, and we're not going to be able to reset those stacks by kiting and CC. This Brute is just going to follow the tank and continue to reset the timer. A couple of the ticks get off a lot of Engorge channeling. I see that they're continuing to engorge, so I use my Typhoon to stop it. You can see how many stacks of this engorge that the ticks get, so that will help you predict when a tick dies, how much damage it's going to deal. In this case, since it's a tyrannical key, the engorge cast, even at 7 stacks, is not dealing a huge amount of damage. But on a fortified key, if they get enough stacks, it can definitely kill players if they're low. This first boss has a fair amount of party-wide healing that's needed. There's also a tank buster, so this Vicious Headbutt is the tank buster. It deals quite a lot of damage. This Hungering Drain deals AoE damage and needs to get kicked. Juggernaut Rush targets a random teammate, and you can stand between the boss and that teammate to split the damage between all of the players. You can also use an immunity, like our mage did here with the ice block. Severing Smash will summon orbs that deal party-wide damage when each orb is soaked, so be ready to ramp and use a cooldown for each of these. Our mage uses Cold Snap and Ice Block a second time. I actually prefer when DPS with immunities save their immunities for the later rushes, because the first rush is pretty easy to heal through because not a lot of damage has gone out to the team. But subsequent rushes, the team is going to be kind of low HP. Here I opt to use a Convoke defensively, and I get a lucky Flourish cast. Feels good. If your teammates are fast enough at kicking the Hungering Drain, then it won't deal any damage, and so you'll have a lot less healing you'll need to do between the other abilities. This can save you a lot of time and give you an opportunity to deal more damage. Here I ramp on the team and I use Flourish. I want to soak these before the Flourish cast runs out. Here we let 2 ticks of Hungering Drain get off, and it deals a ton of damage to the team. We're way behind at this point. Our mage pulls a clutch move and uses Invis at the last moment during the Juggernaut Rush, which causes the boss to target a new player. This buys me enough time to get everyone healed up so we can soak the rush. My Convoke is back off cooldown. This 1 minute Convoke cooldown is actually kind of amazing for fights like this. You'll be able to use it to deal some damage and also use it 1 or 2 times for healing. This next pull is a little dangerous. There's a bunch of acolytes that are going to be casting these dark bolts on random players. The oppressors have a dot Raxol that deals a big chunk of damage at first, and then will leave a dot that deals significant damage. You want to look to dispel that as quickly as you can. Ideally, we use AoE stops on this pack, using stuns and bull rush and things along those lines to stop all of the casts. The acolytes die really quickly, so we'll want to finish them off as quickly as we can, and then wrap up the oppressors. This is our first Chamber Sentinel. This guy has a frontal that leaves a nasty bleed on anyone that's in front of him. This should just be the tank, but look out for melee DPS that are out of position. He puts these swirlies down. You'll need to dodge those. They're going to one-shot on pretty much any key level. Our poor mage. So Sagadan is the easiest of the new Tormented mini-bosses. He has an aura that makes everyone take additional physical damage. He does this AoE slam, and then will pull everyone in and root you, and then does AoE damage around him. He's pretty easy to heal through. The damage is very predictable. Just using F-Flow and Wild Growth is usually enough. You want to mostly prioritize damage for this guy. For this guy, I like to take the additional self-healing power. I find that it is very predictable as opposed to the absorb shield power. I think on higher keys where you need the extra HP to live certain mechanics, the absorb shield power could be very useful as well. This Overseer pack is pretty dangerous. The Overseer adds this debuff that stacks that decreases damage and healing done by your whole team, so you'll want to put priority damage into that Overseer. And then the oppressors are all casting these curses and Raxol. Try to use this corner to line of sight these casts. I got targeted by the curse and tried to line of sight, but I stepped back out too soon. Just managing Spiteful. We'll get the next Overseer pack. Same idea, we want to put priority damage into the Overseer. Look for dispels on Raxol, especially for people that don't have defensives. If you get targeted by the Raxol and you don't have a dispel available, you should plan to use your personal defensives. So we open the lantern, and killing the shades actually gives more stacks of the lantern. So we opened it at the end to get stacks from all of the mobs we were fighting, and then also from the shades. We pull in this Acolyte and Oppressor pack. This is just like the pack from before, right after first boss. You want to be using AoE stops and looking to dispel the Raxol and curses. There's a decent amount of AoE damage that goes out if the AoE stops don't happen, so be ready to press a button. I normally like to skip this Overseer pack. The positioning is really weird in that to retreat from the Dread Bindings, you generally have to run across this bridge, but there's this Chamber Sentinel that's patrolling over here. Our mage is dealing big damn right now, so that Overseer gets owned, and we don't really have to worry about it. It doesn't even get one Dreadbinding cast off. It was really well done by our mage for recognizing that that's a pretty dangerous pull. This Custodian is pretty easy. They have this boop that they hit the tank with. It deals a decent amount of damage. They have this sweeping strike ability, sweeping slash, that summons this tornado and points it at a random teammate. You just have to dodge that. You can look for a soothe on this Dirt Cruncher. It will reduce their HP by a ton and make them very easy to kill. It's actually probably worth pulling that guy with this next mini boss, since most of the damage is avoidable. Then this guy, he has an aura that deals pulsing party damage. He puts out these debuffs that increase fire damage taken. He will do this AoE damage cast that needs to get kicked, and then he'll cast this Scorching Blast on ranged teammates that will deny area over time. He's usually one of the trickier mini-bosses to deal with. He is kind of like Prideful from last season. I usually plan to use a healing cooldown on him, but I see that our team is kind of blasting and we're not in any big danger. I also know that the next couple of pulls in the ring are pretty dangerous, so if I can save cooldowns, then I want to do that. So these are the first scribes of the dungeon. These scribes will target random players and cast through research. It's basically an archer mob that's going to be dealing random damage to your team, so you're going to need to do a fair amount of spot healing for everyone. The Depths Warden has this cast Barb Shackles that needs to get kicked by your team. It will root a player in place and deal a lot of damage over time. The root is especially dangerous because the scribes also cast this explosive vellum, I think it's called, that basically puts this orange swirly down that will explode. And if a player is rooted in there and they're already taking a lot of damage from the Barb Shackles dot, then they're almost certainly going to die. If you get hit by the Barb Shackles as a druid, you can shapeshift to break the root, but you'll still have the dot on you, so be ready to use a personal and health pot or health stone, anything you can to survive it. We get a pretty big pull here with the lantern. I want to get my damage out. I also end up using my flourish for basically for single target healing. I see that our tank is going to be taking a lot of damage, so I get him most of my hots and then cast flourish. He also gets a big ignore pain shield, or rather, this is his blood barrier. So he was actually pretty safe. Once I see that the shield is gone and the flourish is down, I give him Iron Bark. You'll also want to look out for this curse, this explosive anger. You can decurse it, or any player with a decurse can get rid of it. Ideally, you actually wait and decurse this as late as possible, because this curse will increase that player's damage. But when the curse expires, they will detonate and take a big chunk of damage, and also deal damage to any nearby players. The curse also is a small dot, but the dot component is not very dangerous. It's mostly the detonation at the very end. But if you're really trying to min-max, then squeezing it and waiting to decurse as late as possible is probably the move. Pretty much the rest of these pulls are just repeating the same mobs over and over. We've got the Remnant of Fury, the Scribes, Depths Warden. Really, the most dangerous thing here, in my opinion, from a party survival perspective, is the scribes. Especially on fortified weeks, if one player gets targeted by multiple scribes multiple times in a row, they're going to be in a lot of danger. So you're going to pretty much have to use cooldowns and be fully ramped on everyone. So for this boss, there's this ability Castigate that targets a random player. It's going to deal a lot of single target damage. You can use immunities to avoid the damage entirely. The boss also summons this fleeting manifestation ad. While the ad is alive, it will deal party damage, and when it dies, it drops a puddle that will deal a lot of damage if you stand in it. You can see the target of this Castigate. I'm basically fully ramping on them and using that to keep them alive. The third Castigate actually overlaps with the second manifestation summon. This is always going to be a cooldown. In this case, I ramp on everyone and I use Flourish. Next, we get a Castigate on our DK. He uses, I think this is Icebound Fortitude, whatever his personal is. Again, I fully ramp. We get an ad. An ad without the ad, if it lives for a long time, can be really dangerous because it just keeps dealing damage. But our team is doing a really good job of prioritizing damage on the ad. I actually get really unlucky here and get hit by 3 Castigates in a row. In this case, I use my Iron Bark on myself because I don't have Bark Skin. I also consider using a health pot, but end up holding it. I had used a health stone here, though. This next Castigate is going to be another cooldown. It overlaps with the manifestation. This time I have my Iron Bark up. We get unlucky, and our mage stands in the puddle for 2 ticks, and they get down to 197 HP. At this point, they are in serious danger. They ice block, and I heal them up. I don't really have the globals to spend on decursing myself, and I get targeted by a third Castigate. I instinctively panic health pot, which doesn't work because it's on cooldown. I end up dying here. There were a couple things that I could have done. So first, I could have hit myself with the Sun Ward. Second, my Convoke was off cooldown, so I could have casted that. I also have my Cube, which is currently set to heal. If so, whenever there's a player with really low HP, your Cube will switch from giving you stats to healing. So I had a few things that I could have done here to try and survive this, but it took me from basically full HP to dead in 3 ticks. If you assume that the target of each Castigate is selected independently, then the odds of this happening 3 times in a row on one player is 1.5%. So very, very unlikely that this is going to happen. It was very unlucky. So a lot of the trash down here is, well, basically everything is stuff we've already seen before. We have basically all oppressors and then one doubt. Our tank tries to group everything up as best he can, so we get both of these two and kind of bring them over to this 2-pack. You want to be careful and make sure that you're not pulling them across the boss, otherwise the boss will pull. Again, we want to use AoE stops here, look for dispels. It's Tyrannical weak, so I'm not too concerned about this. Mostly dealing damage, getting out some hots. I see the shades spawn, so I wild charge to my warlock. Here I make a pretty big mistake. My tank is running over to the tormented mini-boss that's over here, and I'm pretty focused on keeping these shades from patrolling across the boss. So I drop Earth Souls, and I'm gonna start casting roots and all sorts of things like that. The problem here is that once the mini-boss pulls, the slow aura is going to be applied to everyone. So now I'm as far away as possible from this boss, and ideally you are next to this boss, so you can avoid all of the abilities very easily. So I try to use Soul Shape to get over there. One of my Soul Shape links bugs out entirely. I'm now just trying to keep everyone alive. This whole time we have this Oppressor that's up, who's putting out the Rack Soul Dot. Our DK gets 2 stacks of Rack Soul, and so I dispel him. The Oppressor dies and spawns a Shade who's targeted on me, so I use my Typhoon to keep away from him. This was kind of chaos. These kinds of things will happen in pugs, where there's just no communication, and part of it is just trying to be as aware as possible of what your teammates are doing. I probably should have predicted that they were going to run over here and pull this. So this boss has Iron Spikes. This is a tank buster. Be ready to heal your tank a lot and use Iron Bark if they don't have any defensives up. Next is Rite of Supremacy. This is going to deal a ton of AoE burst damage. You need to collect these orbs to give yourself damage reduction. I like to use Stampeding Roar so my teammates can collect the orbs as quickly as possible and get back to dealing damage. I also will Bark Skin on cooldown and use Bear Form to give myself a bit of extra HP to absorb the damage. Ideally, you're also ramped for this. I did a bad job on this one, and my team wasn't ramped up. The next thing that happens is this Ritual of Woe. This is going to summon all of these, or rather, Endless Torment. This is going to summon all of these swirlies that deal damage if you're standing in them. It's going to leave a nasty dot, and while it's being cast, everyone will continue to take damage. So I like to get my damage out as early as possible on this guy. You're going to be spending a ton of time healing, so you'll want to prioritize that. Again, our mage ends up only collecting 2 orbs and almost dies. I use Convoke and end up getting a Flourish. For me, it's kind of a toss-up on which boss we should use Lust on, whether it's the second boss or this boss. This boss is also really tough. Our mage does a good job and uses Ice Block here. I ramp on the team and use Flourish to try to keep them all topped. At this point, I'm pretty much only going to be using my cooldowns for healing. We have another Rite of Supremacy, so I get a couple rejuves out, go to collect my orbs, get into bear form right before the cast goes off, and I Convoke for healing. We're still kind of low, so I Trank. This is slightly risky to do, because if you get targeted by one of the swirlies, then you're going to have to cancel your Trank early. I decide to roll the dice and just press it, and end up being lucky and not being targeted. Yeah, this boss is pretty tough. The next pack is a couple of Oppressors, Huntmasters, and Gargans. The Oppressors are going to be the main source of party damage. They're going to be casting Raxol. You'll want to be dispelling that and healing through as best you can. The Huntmasters will continue to drop their traps. The traps will probably one-shot players, so not much you can do about it, but if you're near a trap, definitely try to avoid it. Here I don't have my Dispel, so I can't decurse the mage. The mage got silenced. Our DK ended up getting hit by one of the traps and took 52,000 damage. Luckily they had they must have had their Absorb Shield up from Sagadon. I usually skip this next pull. This is a very dangerous pull. There's an Overseer, a Mistdancer, and a Chamber Sentinel. All of these guys are very dangerous mobs. The Mistdancer and Chamber Sentinel are going to be dealing a lot of tank damage. The Mistdancer denies area, the Chamber Sentinel denies area. All the while, you have the stacking debuff from the Overseer that's making the pull take longer and longer. Again, you want to prioritize damage into the Overseer. It's a good idea to skip this pack because the tank's going to have to use a lot of defensives here. And they're going to need a lot of defensives for the next couple of pulls in the gauntlet. So unfortunately, our tank ends up using quite a lot here. I also ended up using Iron Bark on him. This next pull is the first pull of the gauntlet. These Acolytes are the same as the Acolytes from before. They're going to be casting Dark Bolts on random teammates. AoE stops on this pack are great. The Cadets are probably the most dangerous mobs in the dungeon for your tank. The more Cadets that are up, the more damage they deal, and they basically just truck your tank. At this point, our tank already had a ton of stacks of Necrotic from earlier on in the first part of this pull. The sprites have a couple of melee abilities, and so they're going to stack up Necrotic pretty quickly, all the while the boss is meleeing as well. So he goes into the Cadet pull, which is one of the most dangerous pulls for the tank, with 30 stacks and very few defensive options, and I have no Bark Skin. I ramp on him and press Flourish, but at 30 stacks of Necrotic, there's not a lot that we could do to actually keep our tank alive. He also dropped his Spear of Bastion. I considered using Typhoon here, but saw the Spear of Bastion and I knew that it wouldn't actually do anything. This ends up being a full wipe at the very beginning of the gauntlet. Luckily it happens at the very beginning, and so we don't spend a ton of time running back. So now we're going into this Cadet pack with a lot more tools available. We have Shield Wall, we have Iron Bark, we're in much better shape. Also no stacks of Necrotic, feels good. So given all the tools that we have, I'm spending more time now dealing damage. I ramp on the tank, I give him Iron Bark. I drop Ursals because I see all of these shades are here and a bunch of them are targeting me, and I know that they're also going to be coming for my Clanty teammates. You want to be ready to get into the shield when the boss casts Gloom Squall. You can also use the shield immediately on pull for each of these packs where she is in it, and use the DR component to your advantage. It will be back off cooldown before the first Gloom Squall if you do this. Again, our tank is in pretty big danger. He has 30 stacks of Necrotic. He ends up pulling the next pack, so we B-res him. This is really tough on Necrotic weeks. Necrotic makes already difficult pulls even more difficult to heal through. At this point, I'm mostly just spam healing the tank. This next pull is a little bit of a break. We have just some sprites and acolytes, so a little bit of party damage going out. This is one of the easier pulls in the gauntlet, especially since we ended up with 10 stacks of the lantern buff from the previous pull. I think if you have cooldowns available, it's probably worth just pulling this pack into the next pack. Our tank has the same idea. I don't notice in time though, and I end up being far enough away that I can't get into the shield for a Doom Squall or Gloom Squall. So I end up dying. Our DK B-reses me. This next pack with the Chamber Sentinel and 2 Skirmishers can be pretty dangerous because everything here is dealing big tank damage. I opt to Resto Convoke, and at this point I'm really just getting healing into my tank. Our DK is taking a lot of damage. I think they pulled threat from something. Yeah, they had a shade actually that was following them. That was dealing a lot of damage. They also got hit by the Craggy Fracture for 30,000. At this point, I'm looking to drink. I want to get some mana before the boss. I know we're tight on time. We have a little less than 4 minutes to kill this pack to finish our count and then go boss. So I want to get my damage out. We want to get this pack done as quickly as we can. It's pretty much just these Gargans and 2 Huntmasters, so look out for the Dread Shot going out to your teammates and for players standing near traps. For this boss, you can largely prioritize damage, unless players do a bad job of dodging the bleeds, or they end up cleaving the bleeds onto other players. So there's this targeted ability, Wicked Rush, where the boss will rush towards a player and apply a dot to that player and anyone nearby. If you run fast enough, you can actually dodge the dot. So at this point now, every player has a dot, only one stack though. And then when we drop the shield, it clears the dot. It also clears Necrotic. So I can see these two players are targeted by Wicked Rush. Our mage ended up using Ice Block to totally avoid the damage. That's a decent use of Ice Block. I see I'm getting targeted, so I'm preparing myself to dodge. I have this weak aura that tracks when the Wicked Rush is going to go off, and when I see the boss coming towards me, I soul shape. At this point, I'm trying to focus as much as I can on damage, because I know we are really tight on time. But I also see that my mana is a little bit low, so I prioritize getting some of these mana orbs. You want to try to maintain your F-low as much as possible. It's going to do a ton of healing throughout the entire fight. Another Wicked Rush on me. At this point, I have no mobility cooldown, but I do have the Satchel of the Hunt from before, which gives me just enough movement speed to dodge the bleed. Again, mostly prioritizing damage now. I see we have a few bleeds out, and so to save time, I just Wild Growth and Flourish. Tank needs a little bit of attention, so I put some mods on him, and then get back to dealing damage. At this point, I see my Convoke is coming off cooldown, so I'm getting ready to send this Convoke. Our DK, 4 seconds left. What a run. Our DK is a friggin' pumper and decides to just slam all of his damage buttons and ends up pulling threat from the tank. You can see the boss is now targeting the DK and he gets trucked. But we time it with 4 seconds to spare. At this point, I'm thinking our team is low and I have two options. I can Convoke defensively to try to top all of these players, or I can send the damage and try to time the key. At this point, I'm way more interested in timing the key than trying to save these players, so I just send my damage. This wraps up my Resto Druid Mythic Plus commentary for this 18 Sanguine Depths. Thanks for watching. If you like the content, please consider subscribing and let me know in the comments if there is anything else you are interested in seeing. I'm working on a UI video and a couple of other videos that I think folks will like, so stay tuned for those, and thanks for watching.